past when I can make your choices for you, he said. You must choose your own path now, for only you can walk it. Oh, hi. You caught me reading a very good Star Trek story. Speaking of good Star Trek stories, Strange New Worlds Episode Review. Wow, thanks so much, me. Without any further ado, we're gonna crack right into this newest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 2. This one's called Children of the Comet. And before we get into the actual episode breakdown, is this episode of this series, number 2, living up to the hype of a return to Star Trek form of classic years prior to the new Trek? Or is it going back to the old tropes of Discovery with the whisper talking and the dreariness and the melodrama and the emotions in hallways? Or is this somewhere in between? Well, follow along with me and we'll get to that, because I think that we are still on a relatively good trajectory based on what we've seen in a lot of this stuff since Enterprise went off the air. But the actual story kicks off on this alien world. It's a desert-looking planet. We've got these interesting-looking aliens here with some robe and ceremonial gear. They're obviously less advanced than a warp-capable or even an industrialized capacity, so suffice it to say, I think these are still relatively less evolved life forms, still living in tents in the desert. Then we kick things off back to the ship, and Uhura here is looking great to me. I understand that we've had about 632,143 new uniforms in all of these Star Trek shows over the past few years. This one might be my favorite. Now, before anyone says anything, I understand this is pre-TOS, and this is very, very, very heavily influenced on the Voyager DS9 era prior to those gray uniforms in First Contact. So I understand the timing might not be right for this, but I think aside from that cadet comm badge, actually it's not a comm badge yet, just the insignia there, that this is one of the most beautiful redesigned uniforms we've seen. Not going to hold too much against it for being in the wrong time period, because as we saw in Star Trek TNG, the cadet uniforms tended to be a lot more ahead of the curve. So like when you first saw Wesley in his cadet uniform, it looked a lot more like what we saw in Voyager, and we didn't phase into those uniforms for another 10 years at least. So maybe, since this is a cadet dress uniform, it is sort of the precursor to what we end up seeing in the future, and it was put off because of the war-type stuff that happened when they went to those more warlike military maroon uniforms we saw in the movies. That's my headcanon. I don't want to disparage it too much because I think this is a beautiful looking uniform here. Basically what happened though is Ortegas told her after she was invited to Pike's quarters for a shipwide dinner that she was supposed to dress up for it. This was a hazing ritual. Obviously she was just trying to play a little game on her. Told her it's a typical thing that new recruits have to do once they get on the Enterprise, and she can now check that off of her Enterprise bingo card. Side note, not a huge fan of what Ortegas is wearing here in her civilian clothes. I know Star Trek usually put a lot of concerted effort into making their civilian clothes look as less like something we would normally wear. Most of the time they looked hideous, but at least they put some effort into it. This looks like something someone would wear today. Not a huge problem, just, it was a bit off-putting to me. Anyways, we get to Pike's quarters because he has invited most of the command crew and some other new people to his quarters to get to know them. He says, haha, I see Ortegas got you on the dress uniform. Anyways, I'm cooking ribs, so I gotta get back to that. And then we get our first proper introduction to Hemmer, the new chief engineer, and he is one of the blind Anar with telepathic abilities that we met way back in Star Trek Enterprise. I say way back even though that's kind of the last classic Trek series we had, but it came earliest in the canonical Star Trek series, so let's go ahead and assume that's what I meant. He and Spock have this nice little double team act going here, trying to make her a little uncomfortable. Not sure how I feel about Spock involved in a little hazing, but it was a good introduction. We got to see him use his telepathic skills to kind of be like, his perception of the surroundings were better than a normal person. even though he is blind. It was a cute little scene. And then we have them all kind of sitting down to dinner together. Pike is telling a story about how he is a terrible, terrible security officer. He was supposed to be chasing a Nausicaan who had lost his pants, and he ended up tripping over the Nausicaaan's pants, and they basically told him at that point, you're not going to be a good security officer, so you might want to think about something else. Not sure if this was an actual security thing or just a test, but it was a nice story for Pike to try and, let his crew know who he is. Then things go a little bit awry. We get into Uhura's backstory, and this is one trope that I hope they ditch here. So in episode 1, obviously Pike's dealing with his trauma, or his upcoming trauma in 10 years. That's a fine storyline. I kind of like where that's going. Then we met La'an, and she had this horrific backstory with the Gorn and her family. And now we found out Uhura has a bad backstory where both of her parents and her brother were killed in, I think she said, a shuttle accident. So really, really hoping we don't find out every single member of the crew is dealing with trauma and having problems, because that is one of the main issues I've had, is we can't just have people living a life because they want to live that life. They all have to have this well of trauma that they're dealing with. And if that's the case here, that could really drag this show back into the depths of some of the worst of Discovery. So then she tells us the story about how she didn't actually want to join Starfleet, but after her parents and brother died, she didn't really know what to do. She was raised by a grandma who was in Starfleet, and because she's such a brilliant linguist, she currently knows 37 languages, she decided to join. Then Pike asks her where she sees herself in 10 years, and that causes a bit of a traumatic flashback to him, flash forward, I suppose, because remember, in 10 years is when his major accident happens that kind of screws him up and makes him live in that horrible life of not the wheelchair, because it wasn't even a wheelchair, that just locked with that scar on his face in that little one beep for yes, two beeps for no chair that we saw back, way back in the original pilot for Star Trek and the sequel Menagerie. And then we saw it a little bit in Discovery too. So he's still dealing with that. Didn't take up too much of the scenes. I hope we're not spending a lot of time with that in every episode going forward. We'll have to play that by ear. He does have this little scene with Una here where she's like, you need to live for today. We can't prove that that's going to happen. Maybe you can change your fate, blah, blah, blah. The typical type of stuff. Nice scene between them. Obviously, they're a good friendship going there from pre-established stuff. So good to see them have this nice relationship. Then we get to the titular Comet of the title. Well, I'm pretty sure that's why I said titular, because it's in the title, so oops for me. And we see they've got some sort of simulation here where the comet is on a trajectory where it will hit the planet and destroy all life within that planet. And we saw that there's those native peoples on there, apparently millions of them from what we find out later from the scans. But they got to try to stop this. They need to try to stop this, because obviously they're not just going to let these people die when they can stop the comet. So they get into the briefing room and try to decide how they're going to stop the comet, because there is something on the comet, some sort of a technologic base, I suppose, for lack of a better word, some thing that obviously means there was sentient life at one point on the comet. So they kind of pass around some ideas. Well, what does this mean? Was it a spaceship at some point that got out of hand? There's no life forms on it, so they decide they're going to go check that out. Always nice to see these conference room scenes where people are kind of bouncing off one another. We'll see a couple more instances of that later in the episode, and those are things that I've missed. The crew kind of bouncing things off each other and working together. A little bit of cringy dialogue here, but I'm not going to hold that too much against them, because I'm sure if we go back to all of Trek, there's cringy dialogue even when we choose not to see it. So I'm going to let that one pass for now. When we go to this room, they're about to embark on their landing party, so they interchangeably use landing party and away mission. First time I kind of missed it. I do like that, because it was referred to as a landing party throughout most of TOS, so I do like to hear them using that again instead of the more updated away mission. And they do use them both, so that's kudos to them. This reminds me of more of an updated kind of decontamination chamber from Enterprise. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be what it is, but they're in here getting EV suited up. Nurse Chapel comes in. She's got one of these magical hypo sprays that's going to, I don't know, do some sort of genetic modification so that they can survive the radiation that's going to be permeating the comet, something along those lines. Spock and Han are obviously more adept to it. She's like, and she injects, was it Uhura first? I think it was Uhura first. And she's like, that hurt. Why didn't you tell me? And then she says, well, because if I told you ahead of time, you might have run. I have a lot of people running on me. I think that was a callback to last episode where those people ran out of sick bay and she had to chase them. Cute scene. She flirts a little bit with Spock here, which will come into play later. And Kirk, not James T, the other Kirk, Samuel Kirk, is also on this mission, mustache fella. And they put on the EV suits, which are a real cool reimagining of the original series suits with the same little logo on them. In their division colors, I suppose, and obviously they look a lot more futuristic than the ones from the 60s, so don't hate this redesign at all. They're actually kind of cool. They take off the ship. This is Uhura's first landing party / away mission, and they beam down onto the Comet with the nice classic sounding and relatively classic looking transporter beam. Again, high marks for that. And they start to explore the area. What's going on? What are they going to find? Well, there's some sort of egg, which they seem to see symbols. Now, it looks just like a lot of grooves to me, but apparently these are symbols which they're trying to figure out if there's some sort of language, some sort of coding. And Lieutenant Kirk, I believe he's a lieutenant, decides to step up on the platform of this egg. Turns out that was a real crappy idea because he gets blasted back. And that's it for Kirk for this episode. He's out of commission. His heart stops. They use a little defibrillator on him. They get him back up and say, we need to get him to the ship or he'll die. But that's the last we see of him. We don't see him back up and about later, so I hope he's okay. I hope he's back to normal next episode. I don't know if he's a recurring character or just a throwaway because of the whole Kirk reveal last episode, so hoping we learn a bit more about him, even though I know a lot of people were up in arms because canonically he's not supposed to be here in Starfleet, but I'm willing to see where they go with this because I tend to believe we are not playing in the original timeline anymore because of Star Trek Picard. But that's for another video. Anyways, we've got Uhura and Spock going back and forth a little bit here because he's like, well, you're the linguist. You need to figure this out. She's not really feeling it. She's like, this is my first landing party. I don't know what I'm doing here. He says, well, you're kind of the only one who can get us out of this, so... I hope you can figure it out for all of our sakes. And then we are fired upon. The Enterprise is fired upon by this big old vessel here, and it turns out that these guys right here, they kind of look similar to those aliens from Star Trek Universe, with beards and more personality. They are they're called the Shepherds, or at least that's what the Universal Translator takes that to mean. They are this ancient race that is tasked with shepherding these comets across creation. Apparently, these are preordained comets that cross probably even more than a galaxy, the universe, and seed life, and can also take life away if that is what they are supposed to do. So, these are the shepherds of the life-bringing comets. In essence, they've developed their culture, their religion, their whole ideology, their whole identity is them protecting and watching over these comets, which are supposedly, in their opinion, these vast pieces of the universe that are vital to civilization and life and everything. They predate suns, they predate everything. So now we're back to the comet. Uhura tends to figure out a little bit here while she's working. She likes to hum or sing. She mentioned that a little bit earlier. And while she's working here, she starts humming again. And cut back to the Enterprise. They're having a little of a pitched problem with this group. But what ends up happening is the song she is humming is being transmitted into space for the Enterprise to pick up. Once they run it through the computer, they find out, oh, this is a song from Kenya, which is where Uhura is from. And they're like, well, that can't be a coincidence. So that leads to a revelation that helps them figure things out. Meanwhile, Pike and the Enterprise are trying to deal with these shepherds who are basically telling them, you need to stop fooling with this comet. You've already disgraced it by stepping foot on it. You're not allowed to save your crew down there. They're gonna live out, or they're gonna die there. This is gonna be their tomb. And if you try to monkey around with it, we're gonna blast you out of the sky because that's our job. And so they start having this little battle. They're faster and stronger than the Enterprise, so they need to figure out a different tactical solution for that. I went a little too far ahead there, but anyways. So we're cut back down, and we find out that the singing, harmony, music, all that sort of stuff is the actual language of the egg, the structure on the comet, for lack of a better term. And they are able to, by Uhura singing and Spock harmonizing with her, kind of deactivate the shield that is around the comet so that the Enterprise can beam them back up. Basically, immediately after they get beamed back up, the Shepherds are like, "Well, how dare you? We told you not to desecrate our comet." Pew, 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 pew. And they have this big old fight together. And the Enterprise, under the helmswomanship of Ortegas, she uses her vast skills. Apparently, her goal is to become the best pilot in Starfleet. I don't know why every single helmsman wants to, that's kind of their storyline, is they want to be the biggest hot shot in Starfleet. I don't know. It seems like that's just the basic generic helmsman storyline, but that's her goal. She does this great maneuver after she does an April maneuver, so another reference to Robert April, and she kind of flips the ship around and hides inside the comet to the point where they're not going to fire at the Enterprise, because if they do, they're going to hit their precious comet, and we can't have that. Nope, we cannot. So they end up hailing them basically with a bluff, saying, "Well, you've damaged our ship, we surrender, you need to rescue us. You have two choices. Either you don't rescue us, in which case we're going to crash into the comet, our warp core is going to breach, and we're going to blow it to hell, or you're going to shoot at us, destroy us, our warp core is going to blow up, and we're going to blow your comet to hell. Those are your two choices. I suggest you help get us out of here, and we can all leave as friends. We promise we won't touch your comet." Meanwhile, Spock is piloting the shuttle. I'm not sure which shuttle this is. And their plan here is he's going to heat up the shuttle, fly through the ice rings, and kind of melt it so much that the escaping gases can push the comet on a better trajectory that will not impact with the planet. So that's their plan. Obviously, it works. And then after the comet moves off, the vapors, the radiation, whatever you want to call it, comes off the comet here, as you can see. And based on their readings, they discover, well, the atmosphere has been seeded with some sort of sci-fi tech stuff that's actually going to make the planet much more hospitable to life. It's going to allow plants to grow. As we saw before, it's a very desert-like planet. Cut to the aliens. This isn't a great way to see it, but it's pouring rain right now. So the comet has actually seeded life as predicted by the Shepherds. And we cut back to the Enterprise now, and Uhura has now deciphered the musical language, and what she finds out is kind of shocking. So, hours, or at least sometime before they were able to create the plan of Spock cutting the ice off and changing the course of the comet actually sent a message to them that with the exact instructions of what they did. So in essence, the comet knew of its destiny. The comet had a predestination paradox going on, or it could see into the future, or I'm not sure, but it basically knew exactly what they were going to do. And this leads back to Pike's ongoing side story of how he's supposed to deal with his future, knowing that he's going to meet a tragic end. The alien race, the Shepherds, and the Enterprise agree to part not as enemies. The guy says, I think, "We do not part as enemies," and he continues following the comet, which had a name. I can't remember the name of the comet. It was something like Mahat or Mahout, something along those lines. But whatever, it's not just a comet. There's something going on with it. So whether or not it's got a connection to the future or it's just a coincidence, we're not led to believe one way or the other. But I think we're supposed to realize here that fate isn't necessarily what we think it is. And then we cut back to our final scene, which is Pike taking a look at the Federation files of the names of all of the people he's going to save in that accident in 10 years. And he's been doing this for a while now, or at least he memorized the names of all of the people he's going to save to obviously kind of convince himself that his horrific fate is what's important, because he's going to be saving people doing it. And Una basically told him that, maybe it isn't what you think it is. Maybe there is a way you can change your fate, change your stars, and save everyone. Maybe that's why you were given this information. So I think that's going to be something we're dealing with throughout the season. I hope it's not too depressing. Overall, a nice chunk of an episode. I wouldn't say it was spectacular. It's not going to be my, top Star Trek episode ever. It was nice to get more of these characters again. Just this episode alone, we learned more about the characters than we've learned about most of any one Discovery in 4 seasons. That's great. A lot of the tech talk was great. The bouncing ideas off each other was great. Some of the dialogue wasn't perfect. Some of the plot contrivances weren't perfect. They never are. Something still feels a bit off, but I can still give it a pass because things are still feeling better. And maybe part of this is because I've slogged through 4 seasons of Discovery and 2 very disappointing endings for Star Trek Picard, but this is the best we've had in a while, and I'm still feeling pretty optimistic about it. So, until next time, computer and program.